Hi, I hope you guys have been having some fun taking pictures. I've certainly enjoyed seeing your pictures on Flickr. In our last exercise, we learned how aperture, shutter speed, and ISO affected exposure, and we learned how to adjust those three components individually to take a properly exposed picture. In this exercise, we're going to learn how aperture actually affects the way your picture looks. In this segment, I'm going to walk you through how to complete your depth of field assignment. Your assignment was to take one picture using a wide depth of field, meaning that most of the picture would be in focus, and take a second picture using a narrow depth of field, meaning only a small portion of the actual picture will be in focus. Depth of field is defined as the distance between the closest and the farthest object in a scene that appear to be in focus. If we look at this beach picture, we see that all parts of the scene are in focus, from the foreground in front of the subject to the horizon miles beyond the subject. That helps set the feel for the picture. This picture displays a wide depth of field, which adds to the intrigue of the picture. We stare off into the far distance along with the subject. This picture has a shallow depth of field. Our eyes are drawn through the grass, which is out of focus, to meet the cat's bright blue eyes staring back at us. I've got my camera set up on a tripod, and I've got it pointed at some flowers over here. And we're going to look at how changing aperture will actually change the look and emphasis of our photograph. We're also going to be doing some close focusing. So I'm going to show you how to set the focus on your camera and how to change it according to what you want to emphasize in your picture. Now you've gotten some background. It's time to shoot the aperture pictures you need to shoot for this week's assignment. Aperture affects your camera's depth of field. So the smaller your aperture, in other words the higher this f-stop number, the wider your depth of field is going to be. That means that more of your picture is going to be in focus. If you're using a DSLR, I'd recommend using an aperture setting of around somewhere between f11 and f22 to take your picture that has the wide depth of field. If you're using a bridge camera, you may not have aperture settings as high as f22. You may only go up to f8, and I just recommend using the highest possible setting. I know some of you aren't using tripods like I am. If you're not using a tripod, you might not want to use quite as high a f-stop or as small a aperture, because you want to try to keep your shutter speed probably above 1/15 of a second, or your shots may end up blurry due to camera shake. Now if you don't have a tripod, another way to steady your camera is to just set it on something and then use your camera's timer mode to take the picture. So set up your scene, put it on timer, and then you can take the picture using the timer mode, and that's going to keep your camera from shaking. So here's one of our pictures. My camera actually has a little button on the front which will give me a depth of field preview. So when I press that button, watch how the background gets a lot sharper. So this is a good example of why we might not want to use a small aperture and have a wide depth of field, because that fence in the background is actually quite ugly. And it'd be good if we could get that out of focus so that we can concentrate on our flowers. So to do that, we're going to want to use our smallest possible f-stop, meaning our widest possible aperture. So I'll go back down to 2.8. Now a lot of you may not have as fast a lens as I'm using, and you may not have as low f-stop setting as 2.8 as wide an aperture. I suggest for this shot where you want a narrow depth of field that you just use the lowest possible f-stop that you can. One issue we're going to have when we have wide aperture is that we've got a very narrow depth of field. Okay, we want that in this case because we want to blur the background in this picture. But it means we've got to be a little more exact with our focusing. So let's show you a little bit about how to change the focus settings on your camera. Alright, remember different cameras are different, but with my camera I'm going to hit the display. There's usually more than one way you can change the focusing mode. You may actually be able to do it in your camera's menu system over here on the left, internally. So again, that's one thing you should look at. You should look at all the things that you can do in your menu, play with your camera, cycle through them. When I'm taking a shot, I usually use this particular setting on my camera to change things like that. So if I hit the FN key on mine, it takes me over to my settings. And there's two things you can look at here. First of all, your autofocus mode, which you really change based on how you're taking your shot. So usually you want to leave that on auto. If you're doing action shots, you want it to continuously autofocus all the time, so you might want to put it over on C. And for a single shot like this, we're going to get more exact focusing if we put it into that mode. So we'll do that. Okay, next we're going to look at the area that our autofocus is concentrating on. Okay, so let's hit our button to look at it. Probably most of you have your cameras set here, so it's kind of automatically focusing on your scene without you doing too much. So again, it's probably a fine way to set it up if you're taking general pictures. But if you're doing action shots even, you probably want to either use Spot, which uses the center area for focusing, or set it yourself, which I pretty much always have my focusing set on this local setting. Okay, so let's show you how this works. So when you set it on local, it sets up a grid, and you can actually change, you see this orange dot, you can actually change where you want the camera to focus. So usually my camera's on this and I leave it in the center. That way if I'm out grabbing my cats, you know, got to get the camera up quick, get your shot, you usually are centering it. Okay, and we can put it on this, take this picture. Okay, so now we've got our f-stop at 2.8, so we've got a very narrow depth of field. And I'm focusing or emphasizing the very center of this flower. I put it on my timer just because it's going to mean I have a little steadier shot. Alright, but let's say I want to focus this bud here. Alright, well, now don't actually have to go into the F mode that I've got now that I've got my camera set up on local. Oh, this is pretty cool. Let's take a shot right now. He's posing for us. Okay, you just have to hit one of your buttons. With me, it's my autofocus button, so it's actually labeled. Now let me see if he'll be cooperative, and I'll try to get, well, there he goes. But let's say I want to focus, instead now change the emphasis to this bud over here. Well, put my autofocus, move it around. I could recompose my shot a little bit because I can't get it exactly on that. Okay, and though it's not in the center of my picture, now we're going to focus on that bud. And let's do one more where we focus on this back. So get up here, recompose my shot just a little bit. All right, and there's a third shot. There are actually 3 factors that will affect your depth of field. And one of them is your aperture setting. Another one is your zoom. So the closer you zoom in on something, the narrower your depth of field. Let's take a picture here. The wider the angle of your lens, the more depth of field you have. And the third factor is how close you are to your subject. So here I'm quite close. I zoom in. I'm getting my narrowest depth of field. I zoom out, use a wider angle. My depth of field is a little bit wider. Now if I want a wider aperture yet, I just back up on my scene so my camera's farther away from my subject. And let's do one from back here at f22. Here are our final photos. This is our photo with a wide depth of field. And if you remember, we took this using an f-stop of 22. Everything's in focus, including the fence and the house off in the distance. And in this case, it detracts from the flower. Sometimes a wide depth of field is good, but in this case, we probably want to feature the flower rather than the house and the fence in the distance. This is our photo with a shallow depth of field. As you can see, it focuses on the flower, draws our attention to the flower, and defocuses some of the distracting scenery in the distance. This was taken at an f-stop of 2.8.